praise team. Always appreciate what you do to lead us into the presence of God here Sunday morning. Today we are going to continue in our summer Smorgasbord series. And so this is the second week of doing this. A few weeks ago I asked you to give me some topics and scriptures to teach about, think about. And so this next scripture that we're going to read here in just a minute from Matthew 15, verse 21 is going to be up next, talking about the faith of the Canaanite woman. So as you're turning in your Bibles, the Pew Bible page numbers are on the screen there if you need that. As you're turning there, thinking about the month of July, every Sunday in July, one service at 10 a.m. Probably can't say that enough, right? And if you do come early, there will be some coffee, there'll be a few donuts. So if you want to come a little bit earlier and sort of get that fellowship time in, please do that. Or if we do have work to do, we'll put you to work as well. So we'll figure it out. But if you know somebody who maybe doesn't know, if you know somebody who might forget or be confused, feel free to reach out to them this week and say, hey, one service, 10 a.m. all throughout July. We'll do this. We'll get through this together, and I look forward to seeing us all together for that service. So here we go, Matthew chapter 15, beginning in verse 21. Leaving that place, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. A Canaanite woman from that vicinity came to him crying out, Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is demon-possessed and suffering terribly. Jesus did not answer a word, so his disciples came to him and urged him, send her away, for she keeps crying out after us. He answered, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. The woman came and knelt before him. Lord, help me, she said. He replied, it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. Yes, it is, Lord, she said. Even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table. Then Jesus said to her, Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted. And her daughter was healed from that very hour. When I asked for ideas for this summer Smorgasbord series, I wasn't sure what to expect, but I was happy to see that someone suggested this morning's text because it's one that I have wrestled with myself through the years. This will be the third time that I've preached on this particular story from Matthew 15, the faith of the Canaanite woman, or as Mark, the Gospel of Mark calls her, the Syro-Phoenician woman. So the first time I preached on this was in Darlington, Indiana, my very first call as a pastor, as a 24-year-old, not wet behind the ears, I don't think I was at that time, pastor. And so a friend of mine introduced me to the lectionary readings, this 3-year cycle of weekly readings, of reading through the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Psalms, the epistles. And after my first year of preaching in Darlington, I started running out of soapboxes to stand upon. I started running out of things to preach about, and so I gladly took on this practice of preaching through the lectionary because it gave me scriptures and things that I would have never chosen to preach about. And so the first time that this text popped up in the lectionary readings, I read it, and I was a little thrown off by it, but I was like, all I got to do is read my commentaries, and they'll tell me what to say. Read my commentaries, and they will sanitize this story for me. Why does Jesus call this woman a dog? Why does he treat her like that at the beginning of the interaction? And so I turned to my commentaries, and I was like, sanitize this a little bit for me. Make it easier for me to preach. And the commentaries sanitized it for me. They did a good job. They said, well, Jesus wasn't calling her a dog like in a bad way, right? They're suggesting that he was calling her a dog in the sense that the kind of dog that sits on the owner's lap. The kind of dog who is allowed to sit under the kitchen table and get the crumbs off the floor. The kind of dog that has a collar with a name tag on it, or might be microchipped and gets to sleep at the end of the bed. Now, some people might say, my dog doesn't sleep at the end of the bed. My dog sleeps right next to us on the bed, right? So it's that kind of dog. It's a beloved family pet. Jesus was only calling her a beloved family pet. So that sanitized it for me enough. And I preached that, and I said, well, Jesus wasn't really just calling her a bad. It's just, we're just taking that out of context. And so 3 years later, I was serving in Bastrop, Texas. I'd been through the lectionary cycle for the very first time of my life, 3 years of preaching through the lectionary. And this text was back up for me to preach. Before I got to looking at the lectionary text and saw that this was the gospel lesson for that Sunday, I don't remember exactly what happened, but something that week, there was some sort of murder that was racially motivated. There was a racially motivated murder, and it was one of those events that became headline news for us here in America. And so that happens. There's this racial motivated event that happens, and I turned to the gospel text, and I read it, and it bothered me in a way that it didn't bother me 3 years before. I struggled all week to write that message, and I even remember telling Becca, I said, I don't know what I'm going to preach about. I'm having a hard time with this text. I wasn't content to read the same sanitized commentaries that were seemingly afraid to dig into the real background of the text. It just didn't make sense to me. In every other interaction that Jesus has with anyone in the Gospel of Matthew, anyone who approaches him with faith and humility, he never responded like he did here with this Canaanite woman. And if you would say, well, this woman wasn't a Jew, she was a Gentile, I would remind you that the only other interaction that Jesus has with the Gentile in the Gospel of Matthew is with a Roman centurion. He is like the highest ranking pagan living inside the Holy Land, who comes up to Jesus and he says, my daughter is deathly ill. She's going to die. I need you to just speak a word. You don't even have to go to my daughter. Just speak the word, and my daughter will be healed. And so Jesus does for this Roman centurion, this invader, this enemy of the people of Israel, at the very top of that ladder, Jesus heals the daughter of this Roman centurion. No wonder Jesus' own people wanted to crucify him, because he was colluding and sympathizing with the enemy. The centurion had that kind of faith to believe, and Jesus healed his daughter. And not only that, Jesus says this about the Roman centurion. He says, truly, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith. Jesus wasn't talking about his own people here. He was talking about the pagan Roman army, the commander of the army in Israel, saying, I have not seen such great faith. And so before we say that, well, Jesus treated this lady like this because she wasn't a Jew, we have to rethink that, because his interaction with the centurion didn't go this way. So if we think that Jesus' words to the Canaanite woman is in line with his own thoughts towards Gentiles, we would be mistaken. On the surface, Jesus' conversation with the Canaanite woman makes no sense. And it's okay to admit that it's a bit disturbing at first glance. Thankfully, there are theologians and commentators who are not content to get to the easy answers of the story, who are willing to wrestle a little bit with the text and the history. And so I'm going to drop a little thought for you to consider today, and pray that you have ears to hear and a mind to understand what the Spirit would say today. So first of all, note, when Mark writes about the story, he calls the woman a Syro-Phoenician Greek. Mark is just stating facts here. He's just saying this is who she is. But Matthew calls her a Canaanite woman. A Canaanite woman. Do you remember the Canaanites in the Old Testament? You remember the story about the Canaanites in the Old Testament? They were the original inhabitants of the Promised Land. The Israelites had many battles with the Canaanites throughout their history. And all throughout their history, the Canaanites were a thorn in Israel's side. And so Matthew intentionally describes this woman with a term that would have caused his readers to bristle. A Canaanite woman? The enemy, an outsider, someone who's unworthy of God's love and forgiveness? This should have raised questions for Matthew's original audience, which would have been mainly Jewish people. It would have raised this question of why is Jesus going into Tyre and Sidon in the first place? Why go into Tyre and Sidon? If he did not want to come into contact with a Canaanite woman, why go there in the first place? Can you imagine the disciples walking behind Jesus as he's going into Gentile territory outside the bounds of the Holy Lands? Perhaps their questions might be, where are we going? What are we doing? Jesus must be lost. We shouldn't be here. So think about it this way. Let's say you're on a diet. You're trying to watch what you eat, and you know that donuts are your downfall. I want to ask that question. Donuts are your downfall. You're on a diet, so what are you going to avoid? You're not going to go into Dunkin' Donuts, right, just to get a smell of the donuts. You're not going to stroll slowly through the bakery section at Hy-Vee, I'm going to assume, right? You're kind of walk by and sort of blind yourself, right? If you don't want donuts, you're not going to go to a bakery because you know if you do, there's going to be a showdown between you and a Long John. It's going to happen. You're going to come into contact with a donut. And so who do you think Jesus expected to run into in Canaanite territory? Can we say that Jesus was surprised or caught off guard that this Canaanite woman approached him? Or can we say Jesus expected that interaction to happen and even sought out that interaction? Now remember that Jesus is with his disciples. The word disciple simply means a student, someone who is a learner following in the footsteps of someone else. The disciples were apprentices of Jesus. They traveled with him from town to town for 3 straight years. Day and night they're with Jesus, learning what Jesus would do, how he would want them to live and think and act and speak and treat others. And so one day in the future, Jesus is going to tell his disciples, I'm out of here. Now you go and make the same disciples that I just made out of you. Go and do the same things that I taught you. Live in the way that I lived. If you back up to Matthew chapter 14, the story of the feeding of the 4,000, the feeding of the multitude. We sang about the 5 loaves of fish, or 5 loaves of, I always do that, 5 loaves of bread, the 2 fish, that whole story. The disciples, they've seen Jesus act with compassion all throughout his ministry. He heals people. He sets them free from demon possession. He feeds them without exception. The crowds come to him, and he's just ministering to them and giving them what they need physically and spiritually. And so in Matthew 14, the disciples are with Jesus, and they notice that it's getting late, and the crowd is hangry, right? They're angry and hungry. They're ready to eat. And so the disciples come to Jesus and they say, this is a remote place. In other words, there's no McDonald's close by. There's nothing to eat. It's already getting late. And so look what the disciples say. They say, send the crowds away so that they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food. And what does Jesus respond? He says in Matthew 14:16, they don't need to go away. He says, you give them something to eat. Disciple see, disciple do. That's the concept of following Jesus. Disciple see, disciple do. What would Jesus do when the crowd comes in? Send them away or feed them? And so we have this. Back to Matthew 15, a Canaanite woman from that vicinity came out to him crying, Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is demon-possessed and suffering terribly. Jesus did not answer a word. Jesus did not answer a word. Why do you think, in this instance, Jesus is silence. Is he shocked that they would encounter a Canaanite woman? Is he shocked they would encounter a Gentile in Gentile territory? Or maybe, and just go with me on this here for just a second, do you think Jesus wants to see what his disciples are going to do and say? And what do the disciples do? What do the disciples do? Verse 24. His disciples came to him and they urged him, "Send her away, for she keeps crying out after us." Disciple see, disciple do? Or is this just a big old fail? Yeah, you can go back to that picture. Go back to that picture there. Let's keep that up there for just a little bit there. Jesus knew that his disciples had certain thoughts about Canaanite women, or perhaps just Canaanites in general. They were dogs. No, not the cute, cuddly, family pet kind of dog. Dogs weren't kept as pets like we are accustomed to here in America. Dogs were scavengers. Dogs carried diseases. Dogs were unclean. Dogs were pests who lived outside of the city. They didn't get to hang around the dinner table and eat scraps that fell on the floor. And so Jesus knew all along that his fellow Israelites wanted to keep him all to themselves. They would have said, Jesus is ours. Jesus is one of us. Jesus came to save us and deliver us from Rome, not heal a centurion's daughter. Jesus might have come to finish the work of wiping out the Canaanites. Let me suggest that Jesus is simply giving voice to the biases of his disciples. Jesus is giving voice to his disciples' desire to keep Jesus all to themselves, them and their fellow Israelites. When Eliana turned 1 year old, we did something that I think a lot of other parents, at least of our generation, have done. We got her a smash cake for her first birthday. Anyone do a smash cake or have maybe grandkids where for the first birthday you get them their own special cake? And it's for no other reason than to let them eat and get messy. It's a picture opportunity, am I right? You put them in a chair, everybody gathers around. Since you're not watching them open up presents, you watch them destroy a cake, because that's what we all want to do. Like inside, like that's, or maybe I'm speaking for myself, that's like my best day ever. You put a cake in front of me and I'm just going to go to town on it if it's acceptable. The whole purpose, that's why they call it a smash cake. If you go to Hy-Vee, you go to Price Chopper, you say, I want to get my son or daughter a smash cake for their first birthday. It's all so you can smash it down. You can ruin it, destroy it, right? I feel like that is what Jesus is doing in this story. The smash cake could be likened to the idea that this Canaanite woman didn't deserve compassion from Jesus because she was a dog. What his disciples were thinking in their minds when Jesus was silent. And they say, send her away. And so Jesus just smashes that thought outright. He voices it, and then he smashes it. Look at the response of the woman. She says to Jesus, even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. And in the minds of the disciples, they're probably thinking, how audacious of this dog to think that she can even come close to the table. But then Jesus chimes in at the end of that story. You have great faith. You have great faith, and her daughter was healed at that moment. Jesus speaks out the biases, and then he smashes it, and he heals the daughter. Jesus is walking among the lampstands of his church all around the world, and he leads us into the regions of Tyre and Sidon. Jesus wants to lead us into the places where we feel uncomfortable with people who we don't feel comfortable around, and he watches to see how his body will imitate and be his disciples with other people in this world. Whether it's rooted in racism or nationalism or tribalism or any other ism that there is that we use to divide or separate ourselves, Jesus is watching his church. What are we letting separate and divide us? Jesus calls us to take up our cross and to follow him across borders, across boundaries, with good news to those who we might deem to be dogs, even if we don't say it out loud. My friends, there is only one kingdom that is from everlasting to everlasting, whose king rules with truth and justice and peace and grace and love. And this Jesus is gathering all people for himself. He's creating this nation of all tribes and tongues. And I love what Paul says in Colossians chapter 3. Listen to this. Paul says, "But now you must put away all anger, wrath, malice, slander, and obscene talk from your mouth. Do not lie to one another, seeing that you have put off the old self with its practices and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in the knowledge after the image of its creator. Here there is no Greek, there is no Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave, free, but Christ is all and in all. Put on then, as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience. Disciple see, disciple do. And so, my friends, go and do likewise. Cross boundaries. Seek out the lost. Seek out the confused, the hurting, the outcast, the despised, the unwanted. Seek them all out with compassionate hearts, with kindness, with humility, meekness, and patience. And as we do, may the light of Christ shine brightly in all that we say and all that we do. Let us pray.